All right.
Yeah, that's just don't sell it to anybody, but I don't think but if you want to watch it later, show your dad, that would be fine.
He was
Well,
actually supposed to be a part of this meeting, but unfortunately got caught up with some work.
oh, okay. That's no problem. Well, we'll have the recording, and we'll have then the subsequent meetings, and yeah, no, I'm excited. Well, welcome. This
Yeah.
is your personalized positioning strategy session and training. So it will be with me, Laura Ries, and let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Oh, I'm going to have to share screen. I'm going to do screen two. And then from current slide. Okay. Whoops. Nope. I don't want to do that. Exit. I wanted to go from this current slide. There we go. All right. Do you see the slide on the screen?
I do, yes.
All right. Perfect. All right. So this is just the title slide, and welcome to today's session. We're going to kick it off. And just to remind you, 40 years ago, in the year 1981, my dad wrote a book called Positioning the Battle for Your Mind. This has been a revolutionary book that has changed the way people perceive and understand what marketing and what a brand is. As you know, the book was a phenomenal success. Over 4 million copies have been sold. It's the world's best-selling marketing book from what we can tell in the sales. And it's been translated into 22 languages. We've been to over 60 countries around the world talking about positioning and working with consulting clients around the world too. So it's been really, really, really exciting. And so the key principle of positioning, I always like to start here, is that you don't win in the marketplace. Most people are focused on out there, what's going on in the marketplace. The key thing to always remember is that you win right here, inside the mind of the consumer or prospect. So understanding what's in the mind and finding an open hole that you can occupy is the key of positioning. The ultimate goal, owning a word in the mind. And really owning a category, right? If you can be first in a new category, you own that entire category in the mind. And that's a really exciting opportunity. So how do you get in the mind? We know what the end goal is to get in the mind, but it is not easy. It is really a terrific challenge to get in the mind, even with the best idea.
Right.
With the best idea. I mean, think about, Tesla. It's a great idea, but he needed the marketing and the branding and the PR and all these other things and the name and the focus. He needed all of those things in order to get in the mind. And that's why we make the analogy is that you need a sharp knife. You narrow your focus because much like a sharp knife, it gets into the mind much easier than a dull knife. So really what you need to do with your brand and what we do with our consulting clients is sharpen their knife.
Nice.
Many of them, they're trying to do too many things to too many people. And it's fine to start that way, but in order to really strengthen the brand, it's all about sharpening that knife. And it's really helpful to work, with us in order to give you the perspective to understand, where are we going to sharpen it? How are we going to sharpen it? And how does that lead to finding the right name, the right strategy, the right visual, all of those things. So that's a really exciting part of our job of what we get to do with our clients. Now, of course, we started the company Ries and Ries, Positioning Pioneers, and it's focused on the principles of positioning. But as you also know, we wrote a few other books. So far, 12 books on marketing to cover many of the topics in depth, from focus and the rise of PR and the fall of advertising, and of course, Visual Hammer, which I think we should spend one whole session on Visual Hammer, because I think it's one of the most important principles today of building a brand is finding that visual hammer that drives your brand into the mind with the power of an emotional visual.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that is going to be a very, very important topic. And I'll briefly cover that actually today. But to start, a little math lesson, because marketing is not logical. And I love math, actually. But when you think about marketing, it doesn't work and doesn't follow the same math rules. Now, what's logical is that 1 + 1 = 2. Marketing logic, 1 plus 1 equals 1/2 less. Sometimes when you add more, you weaken your brand. More marketing logic is that 2 minus 1 sometimes equals 3. And that was the idea with sharpening your knife. Sometimes if you concentrate and, maybe not your situation, but many companies are into too many things and they have to get out of something in order to focus on the one idea that'll drive into the mind.
Right.
And, we see this, it's a tragedy, actually. If you go out to any store, you'll see this over and over again. This conventional thinking is what's leading companies astray. And what they feel is the strategy is that the more things you have for sale, the more you'll sell. And so what you see on the shelves and, computers is more and more things, right, more and more flavors, more and more varieties. And it's logical. You would think, well, if I offer them more, I'll sell more. But the reality is far, far from that. And, again, go to a supermarket shelf. It is insanity. It's actually insanity. I mean, how many flavors of Triscuits do most people eat or buy? Tragically, when, our family loves Triscuits, of course, we love the regular flavor. They're usually sold out of that one and they're stuck with all these horrible flavors that don't sell as much. And then they come out with even crazier line extensions like thin crisps. So if the regular Triscuit was too fat, we've got thin ones. And of course, even worse, organic Triscuits. Now, many of these line extensions are funny and they're silly. It's tragic for the companies. But really, the important principle to remember here is when you come out with a line extension that says organic Triscuits, you might say, well, how does that hurt you? Maybe you go after a few people that really like organic. Okay, that's one way to think about it. But you also have to remember, what does this do in the mind to the person who buys the regular Triscuits when they see organic? It makes the regular brand look bad. All of a sudden you think, well, why is the original not organic? What's wrong with the one I like? And so that's what it does. And when you think about the mind perception, is offering sometimes a more expensive one makes the less expensive one look bad, and vice versa. All of these things matter tremendously in the mind. What's funny about Triscuits, I don't know why they even thought they had to come out with organic. It really was the original wholesome food. Here's an ad from 1912. It's over 100 years old. And it was always a wholesome brand. So really silly they tried to line extend. They should have gone after the authenticity of the brand, of being really the original healthy snack food. Of course, well, you're probably not old enough to drink, but there's this new trend, and it's called hard seltzers. And you have all the brands jumping into this with line extensions. So Coors is, a leading light beer brand that came up with Coors Seltzer. Again, just jumping after something, not necessarily a bad idea to go after a new category, but you can't do it with a line extension. Coors means beer. It doesn't mean water. And not surprisingly, that one's already been a failure and been discontinued. And again, you'll see this now that, I've enlightened you, if you will. When you go out to the store, it's pretty amazing how many of these absolutely disastrous line extensions that you see out there. And the long-term damage that they do to the brand. One of the tragedies here in the US and around the world is Budweiser, which was the king of beers and really one of, our strongest brands. But over time, line extension doesn't kill you the first day. It's a very slow kill. It just slowly weakens and drips you of your power and of your strength right here in the mind by diluting it, right?
It does drive sales in the short term, right?
That's right. Well, that is a very good point. So sometimes because you have to stock the shelves, right? We also call it the hockey stick effect because there can be a very short term increase in sales. Sometimes people will try it out of novelty, right? They'll see a big display or it'll be on sale. And certainly a big brand will get the distribution to buy into it initially. So initially they will see sales, but it's long term that these things are really big failures, not just in terms of sales, but also, again, it's the erosion in the mind. Think about, again, when you see Dunkin's signature series, what does that mean for regular Dunkin'? it says it's not as good. And the majority of people are buying the regular. So you're just telling your core customer they're not getting the best. And that's not a good strategy. And then there's just some crazy things I love to throw in here. Tropicana is an orange juice brand, and they're having trouble because people aren't drinking as much of it. So they decided they would make a cereal, and they would tell people that they should put orange juice on cereal. Some categories are just not meant to be. So you have to look out for that. Again, you can go for the low end line extensions. So people, were in a down economy. Many, high quality brands try to have a cheap version. So they have Bounty Basic. Again, it makes regular Bounty look bad and look too expensive. Another one I love is Kraft mac and cheese. All kids love mac and cheese, but of course, moms these days are getting more into healthy. And so what do? They launch an organic Kraft mac and cheese. I mean, I don't think there's anything less organic in the world than Kraft mac and cheese. Now, what I love about this one is this is a fabulous idea. Mm-hmm. It really is. It is a fabulous idea, but it will never work with a line extension. It did work incredibly well when an entrepreneur called Annie launched an organic mac and cheese brand in 1989. She did it first, and she got her brand in the mind. What's great about this product, too, is I don't know if you have it there or you've seen it in America, but this brand is now into everything. They've got crackers and cereals, and Annie's is an organic line, full line of food products. But they didn't start that way. They started with one product, mac and cheese. And they launched that. And, over time, look, I mean, that is, over 30 years ago, right? Amazing. But you launch narrow with a narrow focus. That's incredibly important. And it's also important to launch with a new brand. And here, of course, with that entrepreneur to tell the story, Annie's, a fabulous name. And she used the little bunny as her visual hammer for the brand. Been a terrific success. And she sold out to one of the major food brands. Why am I doing this? Well, I like you, but I think entrepreneurs are the future. They really are. I mean, those entrepreneurs like Annie are the ones making the big money and building the big brands these days. It's not the big companies. It's fun to work with big companies, but they're not the future. It's entrepreneurs who can build the value by understanding the process of branding and, building these brands in the right way with new categories, new names, visual hammers. So I'm excited to invest my time in this endeavor with you because I think you are the future. And I think, with the right understanding of how the positioning principles work, can do amazing things. And, maybe you can be the next Elon Musk, right? All the big car companies are not creating the value. I don't think they're the future. The future is with companies and brands like Elon Musk and Tesla. And Elon has become the richest man in the world, current net worth around $260 billion. Pretty amazing. Or maybe like the next Sarah Blakely, another one of my heroes. She's the founder of Spanx. Here again, another brand started by one single entrepreneur. Not a lot of money, but a really big dream and a really great brand that had a very narrow focus. Spanx are undergarments for women to make them look slim and trim. It's a big business. It's $1.2 billion that brand is worth. So really exciting for entrepreneurs to build these brands using the principles of positioning that we talk about. Now, I joined my dad. This is another reason why it's exciting to work with you is, you're working with your dad. I started working with my dad 28 years ago. And it's been fantastic to be working together as Ries and traveling the world. And listen, we've worked with a lot of big brands and a lot of big companies. And, it is fun. It's exciting and interesting. But like I said, we believe that working with entrepreneurs is even better. Many times they're able to take our success. They're in a position to use it better, and they've built some really terrific businesses and brands. And we're so proud of the work we've done with many of these entrepreneurs, and to see them over time, go to the next level, has really been thrilling. And we'll go over many of these case histories over the next couple of sessions because I think they're really valuable to understand how you can take a really exciting idea, apply these positioning principles, and then it really accelerates and takes off. So to start our session today, that was the intro. Is session 1 is going to be focused on positioning principles for the 21st century. Now, the basis of positioning, was a concept first established 50 years ago. The book was 40 years ago. But, obviously some things have changed. But these are really the most important principles, the 5 most important principles for positioning today. And I think it's good to understand kind of the global nature of this. And how it applies to the 21st century. Because many of the core concepts that people believed were key to building brands in the 20th century won't necessarily work today. And where you really see it is the big, powerful brands of the last century are really, really in trouble today. I mean, everyone wanted to be General Motors, General Electric, and IBM. You weren't around, but ask your dad. I mean, these were the companies you wanted to work with, you wanted to emulate, all the managing, all the marketing, everything. It's really, I mean, that's what it was about. Or you could put Sears in there too, in terms of retail. And that one's really in trouble, right? They're in trouble today. And one main reason, and this is a really important principle, is that they can't use one brand name on a full line of products. It just doesn't work anymore. In the last century, there was a certain limitation to resources sometimes. So a big company did have resources where entrepreneurs didn't. But once you unleash resources to entrepreneurs, watch out. And using the branding principle. So one name on everything is what many companies emulate because they say, hey, GM did it, GE did it, IBM did it. But today they're all facing the price of that kind of strategy. Take General Electric. 10 years ago, they had $157 billion in sales, 11 billion in profits. Today, 95 billion in sales, and they lost money. That is the difference between General Electric from yesterday to today. They're still a big company, there's no doubt, but they're not able to make money because the brand is so weak, right? And they're selling off the divisions. They're totally, changing the business because it is such a tragedy, the decline of the market. So take General Motors. I mean, once the largest, most profitable company in the world today. Well, they went bankrupt in 2009. And they're trying to rebuild, but they're stuck behind Tesla, right? Everyone believes Tesla is the future, not General Motors. Take IBM. In the last 10 years, sales are down 23%, profits are down 29%. Story. What's interesting about IBM is they've tried to do a lot of things. They've bought a lot of brands and spent a lot of money, like CleverSafe, Truven, PwC, Cognos, Red Hat. That was their biggest purchase ever at $34 billion. I mean, unbelievable. But they still struggle because the concept of the main core brand has been so weakened by competition. Is this? I thought I had it on silent. Sorry about that. Okay. So let's explore some of the principles for the 21st century, because we got to think different, right? We don't want to be like IBM or GE or any of those companies. So positioning principle number 1, global, not national. You see, it used to be, companies were focused on, being a national brand. We went from kind of a rural to a nationalized branding concept in the 20th century. And if you think about the concept of globalization and what you see out there in the market, you look at a country like China and you say, why is China the fastest growing economy in the world? Well, the answer is simple. Exports. exports. It's not, selling within China that's making China rich. It's exporting, right? It's the export capital of the world. They lead all companies. This is a couple years off, but it's still pretty close to 2.4 trillion, the US at 1.6, Germany 1.5, and Japan 730 million. China leads the world in exports. That's why its economy is growing. China leads America by 50%. And if you look at the gross domestic product, it's increased from 4,000 in 2009 to 9,800 in 2018. It's obviously making the country and the people within the country much, much richer. That's an annual growth rate of 9.8%. You see, similarly, in India, what is, the importance and what the focus of India needs to be is the same thing of exports, right? Much higher than any other country. A country doesn't get rich by selling things to each other. And I think, of course, you understand that. It's the big opportunity for you is not just selling this brand in India. It's about selling it around the world, the global. I mean, it used to be people were very locally focused. But the real big opportunity is a very narrow focus, but looking at the world as your marketplace.
Right.
Right? A country gets rich by selling things to people in other countries. That is a relatively new concept for many companies. And, that is really important for, existing companies to think of how they are going to be able to grow. So the internet is erasing country borders. Many categories are global categories, not national categories. I mean, it's pretty amazing to think that many of these categories, it used to be every country had their own, set of, cereal brands or this brands or that brand. But really now, I mean, we're a global society. We're global consumers. And, you have, friends in probably many, many countries, and you all talk about the same cars and the same phones and the same computers, because these are now global categories. We even have global restaurants and global accounting firms. There's all sorts of globalization that we've seen happen pretty rapidly in these categories, like computers and smartphones and automobiles. I mean, take the global personal computer market. Lenovo at 23%, HP at 22%, Dell at 16%, Apple at 7%, Acer at 7%, and Asus at 6%. Of course, Lenovo is the Chinese brand. Global smartphone shares, again, these are global brands. And I'm sure you've seen how the Chinese companies have really gone global with their brands recently. Of course, Samsung, the Korean brand, has done that many years now. Apple at 22%, Huawei at 16%, Xiaomi at 7%, Oppo at 6%, and Vivo at 6%. Of course, all those are Chinese brands. Of course, global automobile sales have always been, a business that has been global for some time. But it's pretty interesting to see how this is happening and the opportunity. But the most important thing it's pretty obvious to see that companies are going global. But the core principle is to think about the law of globalism. And this is very, very important. The larger the market, the smaller the product line. And it's funny because you think, well, how can that be? You would think the more people I need to sell to, I've got to have more variety or more differences. And it's just not true. And here, if you take a look at how things happen from a rural town to a big city, you'll see what I mean. If you lived in a small town of 100 people, you probably find one store. And in that one store, you'll find everything to sell, right? That's pretty typical. In a big city, you'll find hundreds of specialty stores, right? You'll find electronics, groceries, clothing. One store that sells everything is not probably going to work in a big city. The larger the market, the smaller the product line. So you have to be, overly focused when you take your brand global, especially as you launch it with, just one product. Just one thing. You have to be as narrow as possible to take a brand global and to get it off the ground. So, again, what made America wealthy is certainly America has been, a great success. And it's not because we're better or smarter or any of that. It's because we've built a lot of global brands. There's a company called Interbrand that rates the 100, global brands, the top 100 global brands. Of the 100 most valuable global brands, according to Interbrand, 52 are from America.
Wow.
52. That's why, we are successful. These brands are what made the U.S. successful. You'll see, China, which was just growing, but they so far only have one, and that is Huawei. In order to get China to the next level, and we do a lot of, we'll talk about some of our consulting business there, but to get China to the next level is to build more brands, right? They're just a factory right now. In order to really achieve great wealth and status in the world, it's going to be about establishing and building global brands. Not just local Chinese ones, but global ones. And when they do that, they've got to think differently because, listen, names like Huawei don't sound good in English. It's a tough name. And show me, the language of China is very difficult to go back and forth. And you have to use a very specific branding strategy of many times we advise a second name, an English name for the brand. In order to have the global counterpart to what they're selling in China. One of the advantages. What?
Any examples for that?
Oh yeah, no, we'll go through some in a minute, but absolutely, we have advised many of the companies about that. But I'll make a note. We'll absolutely go over that. Mm-hmm. I will say one is let's see, global. It's mostly in cases, and there's two countries, in particular that are very large countries and large markets where this comes into play. China and Russia, both of those have very different languages than, the concept is that English is the second language of the world. So when you have a global brand, the name doesn't have to be an English word. It has to sound right in English, right? So the fact of, but in countries like China and Russia, where the language, the letters are all very, very different, our idea was to have one name, the local name, and one global name. So it can be the same brand, but in China, it's a character language. So there's really no confusion. Same thing in Russia, the spelling and the language can be so different. So, you've got a brand like, there's, it's hard even to say it, but the leading brand in Russia for vodka is Kremlishkaya or something like this. Very difficult. And we've said, for a global brand, why not call it Red Square? A very, very identifiable visual hammer of the country and the country of origin, particularly important, I think, for any brand of knowing where you're coming from, having those credentials. And then, in this case, use of, a local place that everyone knows about. Sadly, I just want to let you know, none are from China, none are from India.
Me and my father have been trying to find out brands which have gone multinational, and we couldn't find even one.
Yes, it is. Well, I mean, the big consulting brands. So, Wipro and, Infosys, I think in terms of technology, those brands are definitely global. They're not yet, on this list, but they have made, put India on the map. And we have been to India many times and talked to many companies and worked with many clients there. There's great potential, obviously, in India. I mean, we like to call it it's funny when we talk about India and China, we say China is, the factory of the world. And we say, make it in China and think it in India, that India is the intellectual capital of the world. I mean, there's more PhDs, gotten in India than any other country in the world. And there's no doubt about the intellectual abilities that India has. I think it's just harnessing that ability into building brands, right? Not just thinking, but also building brands to take advantage of that. So again, another exciting reason why we're together. So principle number 2, competitor focused, not customer focused. So this is interesting because again, It's not logical. Much of marketing is just not logical. It seems like, well, I should be totally focused on my customer. I should make my customer happy, right? Wrong. Well, not totally wrong. You don't want unhappy customers, but all these companies were very much customer focused. They chased after the customer. They line extended. They were customer oriented. But when you think about branding and marketing, the problem isn't your customers. The problem is the competition. If you had no competition, right, you would have 100% of the market. So when we think about marketing and what marketing really is, it's a battle between companies over markets. It's much like warfare. It's a battle between countries over territory. It's similar. I mean, warfare is a physical battle, and marketing is a mental battle, right? It takes place inside the mind of your prospects. I mean, the key concept I think for you is you have a totally new category that people have never heard of, right? So, they don't have a reference point in the mind. So, finding a way to hook it into something and having them understand it is going to be one of the challenges. It's also a huge opportunity, right? Because being first in a new category is the most powerful position you can have. So if you take the airline industry as a really good example of how companies were very customer focused. And, some customers wanted first class, right? And some, wanted to save money and go coach class. So all of our four leading airlines and most airlines around the world offer all classes, many times, three or four classes. They've got first class, business class, coach comfort, and regular coach. There's all sorts of classes and prices. Has this led them to more success? No. Our four leading airlines have all gone bankrupt. And in general, people hate them. I mean, they fly them because they have to, because there's, usually only a small choice of when you want to get from A to B. But there's one airline, and some have copied it around the world in other countries, that didn't go bankrupt, that used the opposite strategy. They narrowed the focus. And they didn't focus on the customers. They focused on being different than the competitions. So why didn't Southwest go bankrupt? They were different. They were different. That's the opportunity. If when you have, when you're thinking about your brand and your position, you've got to say, all right, what are the competitors doing and how can I be different? If they're all offering all types of cert classes and service and prices that's, unpredictable and unreasonable, we're going to do the opposite and have coach class, coach service only. The other interesting thing is they said no to a lot of things, no inner airline baggage, no pets, no food, no seat assignments. It was really simple. The pricing was simple. The strategy was simple. And they really had a tremendous success. They also had, specific routes that they would fly, and they only flew one type of airplane because they were so narrowly focused on a point-to-point system. And this also led to them being very safe, actually. In 47 years of operation, they never had an unprofitable year, and they didn't have a major catastrophe. If you think about in terms of operations, if you only have one airplane, it's a lot more simple to manage the maintenance and the safety and the pilots and all of these things. So operationally, a focus can also help you, right? It doesn't, distract you from trying to do too many things. You get even better at the one thing, and people really know you for that one thing. And better is an interesting thing because that's what most people are focused on. How can my product be better than the competition? It's difficult to win if you think about that. It's very difficult to win by just trying to be better. You can't win this way. And it's because of the mind, not because it's bad to be better. Because when you tell your prospect that our brand is better, they think that's what they all say. Yeah. Right? Yeah. What company doesn't say that and claim that they're better? They all do. It's much easier to win by being different, by finding what makes you different and focusing on that. And then telling your prospect, hey, our brand's different. And when you say that, you start then a conversation, and the customer says, well, hey, why does that make it better? They're willing to consider brands that are different. That opens up, the mind, if you will. People are resistant when you say you're better. They suddenly get defensive and say, prove it. I don't believe you. But if you say I'm different, they say, okay, why and how and all of this. And that's the opportunity, in building a brand or even a category of how are we going to be different and how are we going to reinforce that. Now, when you're competing with in an established category, if you think about energy drinks, that category was, launched by Red Bull, right? The brand out of Thailand. It had a Thai name. They gave it, the English name and took it as a global brand. Enormous success. Part of the success, I think, has to do, they were in a small size can. So not the traditional 12-ounce can. It was an 8.4-ounce can. And today, of course, Red Bull is a huge winner. They pioneered the category, a $6.2 billion global brand. Now, once a category takes off like this, you can expect many competition, many competitors. And that's what happened with Red Bull. Hundreds. I mean, 1 year alone had almost 1,000 new energy drink brands. And you would think, well, some must have been better, taste better, work better, look better, have a better name. No, and they also copied it in the 8.4-ounce can. None of these copies of Red Bull trying to be better turned out to be a big brand. The brand that is currently number 2 did so by being different. And the difference was not necessarily in the product, but the can. Monster Energy came in a 16-ounce can. Now, I mean, the question is that better? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but it was different. It's so important to be different. It's so important. It's the most important thing. And if you look today in the US and now around the world, Monster is a very strong number 2 brand. What we see over time is that in a established category that it comes down to what we say duality of 2 brands tend to dominate. And then there's a trickle of small, tiny brands that, have niche positions, if you will. Of course, the key position is being the leader. But if you're not the leader, you need to be the opposite of the leader. And that's one of our core principles. It's interesting to note that, Coca-Cola has tried to go after the energy drink market. They've got lots of money, lots of resources, but they haven't been successful because they've always tried to be better. They never understood the concept of being different. So positioning principle number 3, narrow, not broad. We can never say this enough and show examples to see how narrowing your focus strengthens your brand. And it's because, of course, what I started out with, that you don't win in the market, you win in the mind. And that's the reason for the narrowing the focus. The narrow approach is what drives your idea into the mind. Again, much like that sharp knife, right? So we're going to sharpen our knives. So if you think about this example, selling a car, listen, a car is a very important investment, probably next to a house, the second biggest purchase somebody would make. So they think a lot about it, and companies do a lot of research. And when you ask people in research, and we do talk, you've got to be wary of some research and how you use it. But in research, people will tell you a long list of things they want in a car. They want it to be reliable and good mileage, good looks, nice interiors, the right size, drivability. I mean, they'll tell you they want everything. And so what do companies do? Well, they look at that research and they say, well, if they want everything, we better tell them we have everything, right? We better put all that down. But that is it doesn't lead to a very strong brand. And I love this old BMW ad because it's trying to do exactly just that. Our new BMW is a unique combination of luxury, performance, and handling. And it's amazingly easy on fuel. What more could you want? Right? That's what they did. And they did this type of advertising for more than a decade. Did that build the brand? Guess what? They were nowhere in the US market. They were 11th in sales. I mean, behind these, brands that aren't even on the market anymore in some cases. It didn't build the brand. Nobody heard of it. You've got to, particularly when, you're trying to establish a brand, you've got to cut through the clutter. And the best way to cut through the clutter is to narrow your focus. So they changed the strategy. And they took, instead of saying all of these benefits, they picked one: drive ability. I'm sure you know the slogan, the ultimate driving machine. They focused on that concept of drivability. And again, what made that even more powerful is that it really was the opposite strategy of what Mercedes-Benz stood for. Mercedes-Benz, of course, pioneered the high-end luxury vehicle market. But it was also a very comfortable ride, right? They were big and luxurious, and comfort was important to Mercedes. And so BMW was more nimble, more of a driving machine. How successful was it? Well, it became the world's largest selling luxury vehicle, as a matter of fact, ahead of Mercedes and ahead of Audi for a time until they changed their strategy and they've lost that leadership position. They expanded instead of maintaining their focus. And we get frustrated because everyone continually is pushing to expand without realizing that the real opportunity is to find a focus and maintain that focus, if you will. So we have many clients in China. It's a big market for us. We have an office in Shanghai, and we do enjoy. Positioning is relatively new there. The book only came out about 15 years ago in this country, and so they've been quickly adapting these practices and building brands. And so we're very excited about that. Most of the clients are local in China, but now many of them are taking this to the global stage. One of those clients is Great Wall Motors. And they started by making pickup trucks as the economy opened. And by the year 2009, they were making pickup trucks, but they also expanded. I mean, the market was growing very quickly. They had capital. And so they expanded into passenger cars, minivans, SUVs, almost every type of vehicle. And it was at this point in 2009 that they came to us. Here's Ries, China. And they said, how are we going to, and that's our partner, Simon, in China, how are we going to grow our business? We have these existing brands and existing categories. And one of their problems, here is all their brands they had, is they had too many models. We said they had too many models. They thought they probably needed more models, right? The business was growing. But that wasn't true. Because they were selling a lot of cars, but they weren't building any brands in the mind. They had too many models, for one. And so what our first, we've been working with them since then, actually, as an ongoing client. But the first thing we needed to work on, and our main recommendation, was to focus on one model. That's the opposite of what most consultants would ever do, right? And our focus was on one model, and we picked Haval. First of all, it had a better name, but more importantly, it was the better category. It was the company's SUV model, and it was an economical SUV. It was under 100,000 renminbi, yuan, which is about 14,000 US dollars, and that was an important part of the strategy. That was the position, the leading economic vehicle under 100,000 renminbi. And they became the leader. That's about, I guess, 16,000 with the current exchange. What's interesting is, why did we pick SUVs? Well, at the time, the research back then showed that Chinese consumers wanted sedans because they thought they were more prestigious. But knowing how SUVs have taken off in the US and in most countries around the world, we figured that the practical and love of SUVs would eventually get to China. Initially, China, they didn't think that they were, very much on social status, that they were too practical. But SUVs are terrific, right? So we figured the other 28 Chinese automobile companies would follow the research, right? And sometimes, consumers don't know what they don't know, right? They're very bad about predicting the future. Research can be very good at telling, what's going on now, but not necessarily what they'll do in the future. So they all focused on sedans, and Haval focused on SUVs, on the economical SUV, and it became the number one SUV brand in China. An absolute enormous success. Over time, they slowly transitioned out of most of the other product lines that have focused mainly on SUVs. And the sales took off like crazy. In 2009, there were 1.9 billion. Today, they're 20.7 billion, up 989%.
When you say they focused on the SUV, does that mean that that was the only car they were selling, or was that the car that they were marketing?
Well, that's a good question. So, very good question. So, what they had that let me go back and I'll show you all the. So they had all of these models, Deer, Wingle, Haval, Sailing, Cool Bear, so cool. I mean, some of the names are, and they were, in, like I said, the pickup trucks, passenger cars, all of these things. What they did was two things. You can't, when you're selling cars, you can't just stop making cars. So, it took many years for them to slowly get out of these businesses. But what they did do was focus all of their marketing effort and dollars on Haval and making that the flagship of the company. So that it's a very important principle because you can't just shut down a car line. These things take time, but they did put the emphasis and focus mainly on the Haval brand. And that the Haval brand is what led to the sales success of the company. And you can see this in the PR has been important as well. Here's a headline from an article in the US on Business Week. This Great Wall is built on SUVs. And here we have the chairman right down there, who is somewhat known as the Henry Ford of China, because really, the Haval as an economical SUV, that was many times a person's first car, right? As people were transitioning to making more money and they having the ability to buy cars, it was fabulous that they could have a brand that they could feel proud about, right? And to buy an economical SUV brand. And now, they've been taking that brand globally. So positioning principle number 4, multiple, not single brands. One interesting strategy to understand as companies grow and you have a company like Haval or Great Wall and Haval, what do you do next? You see opportunities and you want your company to grow. You can have your company grow, but you don't want to do it by line extending your brand. You need to keep your brand focused and launch multiple brands. This is a really important strategy for big companies. What's important to remember, though, is, it's not for entrepreneurs at the start, right? You don't want to launch too many brands at once. You want to definitely launch one at a time. And so that's a key differential. This is an important principle, and sometimes it's misapplied. An entrepreneur, I was talking to a cosmetic company, and they had a product for teen acne, but also, adult or mature women wrinkles. And, they were trying to build 2 brands at once. And I said, no, you've got to focus on one brand first. Let's make this brand successful and launch a second brand for the afterwards to take advantage. Now, again, interesting to note about the 20th century versus the 21st, single brand companies dominated the 20th century. We talked about, IBM and GE and such. Multiple brands will dominate the 21st century. And so, even if you think about what, Elon Musk has done with SpaceX, right, being a second company, or Amazon and AWS being a second company, with Toyota and Lexus being a second company. That's the opportunity. That's the really one of the interesting things about the car market is we feel that is the big missed opportunity of the 21st century of the major auto brands not launching, electric only brands, and instead of expanding their fuel brands with electric versions, to launch a separate car brand. And you see the successes. I'm sure you know them, right? Multiple brand companies like Apple, Coca-Cola, Procter and Gamble. The fact is that they own multiple brands, each that are focused, each that dominate categories. And these brands are the ones that are building, and these brands are the ones that have the terrific profit margins. Apple at 20, they're not losing money like GE. They're making a lot of money, 22% at Apple. 18% at Coca-Cola, 14.9% at Procter and Gamble. The average net profit of the largest 500 companies in America is only 6.3. So you can see in relation, these multiple brand companies are doing much better. Why? Because they don't put one name on everything. Apple has 4 brands: Macintosh, iPod, iPhone, and iPad. And it is a $2 trillion company on the stock market. There's a typo right there. Coca-Cola has 20 brands, each with annual sales of $1 billion or more. And many, these companies are actually paring back to just focus on the biggest brands. And that's a good idea. They also have the opportunity to launch new brands, but they don't quite have the understanding, and their systems aren't set up the way entrepreneurs are, actually. Entrepreneurs have the flexibility to take advantage and see these new opportunities. And they also have the patience. It takes time to build a brand, and big companies often aren't patient enough with them. They spend too quickly on advertising. They push too rapidly in distribution, for example. Procter and Gamble has 25 brands, each with sales of $1 billion or more. So, as you grow, you always want to think, when you see opportunities, of thinking about second brands for those. So positioning principle number 5, visual, not just verbal. And as I said, we would kind of touch on the basics of the visual hammer, because I think it's really important before we end today. We live in a world of words. Most books, most positioning was all words. Our meetings are words. Our messages are words. Our speeches. Most marketing books are words. The original positioning, really didn't have any visuals in it. Marketing plans are usually all words, very few visuals in those. And so, it's particularly in business and marketing, you sometimes forget the opportunities that visuals, when added to your marketing strategy, the advantages that it will give you. Because we found the goal is to own a word. That's always true. But the best way to drive that word into the mind is not with a word, it's with a visual. That visual instantly communicates something in an emotional way, in a quick way, a responsive way that words can't. And let me give you an example. You drive down the road and you look at the stoplight, and it's green, you go. It's yellow, you brake. You brake without even thinking sometimes, right? It's an instantaneous process. And then a red light, you hit the brakes. Can you imagine, instead of a visual, I think these colors are as a visual, if they use words as go, caution, and stop without the color. There's much more brain action. There's less visual response. There's less, there's more time. The reality is that there will be way more accidents. And that's the difference. It's the difference. It's communicating the same idea, right? It's exactly the same principle that you want people to stop or go. And you're doing it, but you're doing it with words versus visuals. And that's the clear difference. That's the opportunity to do it with a visual, makes it much more powerful, much more memorable, and much faster too. And the reason this is so is because of the brain itself. And the fact is that inside your head, you have two brains, not just one. There's a left brain and a right brain. And if you've studied any of these in school, you might know that the right brain is what handles visuals. So pictures are processed instantly by the right brain. And the left brain handles verbals. So when you hear me talk, that's going into your left brain, and you're seeing the visuals are communicating with your right brain. And visuals are emotional, right? There's no doubt that seeing a picture of a baby is way more emotional than seeing the words. Now, what's interesting is the printed word takes a much longer route. It's a visual that must be read and perceived by the right brain and then transmitted over to the left brain to convert it into sound. That's why when young children learn how to read, they read out loud because they're kind of reading to themselves. And so, or they mouth the words, they're trying to put it into their own brain. So it takes about a third of a second. And you say, well, what's a third of a second? Well, a vehicle traveling at 60 miles an hour will move more than 29 feet in one third of a second. That could be the difference between a safe stop and an accident. So even that small amount of time makes a difference. But even more importantly, the emotional power of a visual is critical. The best way to put a brand into the mind is not with words. I mean, you might say that these companies did have verbal strategies. For Coca-Cola, they were the real thing. For Marlboro, they were the masculine cigarette, but it's not the words you remember. It's the visual that communicates it that was so powerful. For Coca-Cola, it was the contour bottle, the original bottle. And if for Marlboro cigarettes, it was the cowboy. And the consistent use of these visuals, that contour bottle, is what made Coca-Cola the world's most valuable brand. And for 18 years in a row, that interbrand list, Coca-Cola was number one as the world's most valuable brand. And you might say, well, what happened to Coca-Cola since, 2012? Did the brand diminish? Well, there has been some line extension, but the Coca-Cola issue isn't a brand issue. It's a category issue. The problem with Coca-Cola is people don't want to drink soda as much. And there's been, a ever so slight decline. I think the brand is strong, but the category is suffering. Much the same with Marlboro. For fewer people are smoking, which is a good thing. But the brand itself is strong. That visual and that communication and consistent communication did make Marlboro the world's best-selling cigarette. And there was plenty of competition. Winston at number 2 and Mild 7 at number 3. We're trying to get, but what's the visual for Winston or Mild 7? I don't know. You can't think of anything. What you do notice is that they do have a trademark, but a trademark is not a visual hammer. And the Coca-Cola, logo is very attractive. And almost every brand has a trademark. But it doesn't communicate something. It's not a visual hammer. And that's the difference. The contoured bottle is a visual hammer because it communicates an idea. It drives the idea of the original authentic cola into the mind. That nails those words. And what's interesting too is you can repeat visuals much more often than you can repeat words. The real thing is a nice slogan, but if it was on everything, it would be annoying. But you can use that visual over and over again. And Coca-Cola over the last decade has done a really, really great job of doing it. They put it on the cups and the cans and the advertising and the truck. They don't sell a lot of Coke in bottles anymore, right? But the use of that visual is really, really effective. And you can see how it has strengthened that brand and keeps it as what it is. Again, the problem for them is the category. The largest global restaurant chain is McDonald's. Last year, they had sales of 22 billion, net profit of 23 billion. And think about McDonald's, especially in retail, the visual hammer is incredibly important. And where would McDonald's be, for goodness sakes, without the golden arches? I mean, that is a dramatic visual hammer for the brand that drives in, again, because they were first, that simple, singular color visual hammer becomes the identity for the brand. There's nothing, you might say it looks like bent over French fries, but there's nothing terribly specific about that visual. But because they were first and being the first fast food chain, that symbol has, stands for McDonald's in the mind, and the use of it and the largeness of it. Great street visibility again. I mean, look at their number, their major competitor, Burger King. It's very attractive, but geez, it's easy to miss a Burger King if you're going to drive down the road. It's much harder to miss a McDonald's. And that's, again, where when you're thinking about branding and thinking about your visual and maybe your logo, very important to think about not just being, pretty or attractive, but to be very, very singularly focused to stand out. And that is key. And one of the things we'll talk about when we get into visual hammers is the use of single colors and all of these technicalities. So again, you see how they make use, when you have a visual hammer, to really, really use it in a big and a bold way. Here you have golden arches at a Dubai airport I saw. So one last example is that Corona, what made Corona a leading global brand. Corona is, of course, from Mexico. It's the only Mexican brand on the global 100 list of top brands. Well, what did they do? They stuck a lime in it. They stuck a. Now, this was a working class beer in Mexico, and the importer was trying to bring it into the U.S. At the time, Mexican restaurants were taking off like crazy. We're really into Mexican food here. And so a Mexican beer brand was a great opportunity, but there wasn't really a well-established one until Corona. And part of what established the brand was this shocking use of a lime in the top of the bottle. And it communicated something. It was the visual hammer, but it communicated that Corona was an authentic beer brand, because you see, limes are associated with Mexico. In the U.S., we're all about lemons, right? We drink lemonade. It's a lemon. So for the U.S. market, it really was a significant, identifier with Mexico. And of course, the name and the fact that they sold it in Mexican restaurants. And what's even more interesting is you see the success of Corona. I mean, Mexico, not really a country known for beer the way, Germany is, right? But it has taken that brand and gone global with it. And the opportunity they've kept with the lime, with the Mexican food. And, Al and I, not too many years ago, were in India and we ordered a Corona and they served it right there with a lime on top. So, having that really made it stand out. And not just that, it actually communicated that it was an authentic beer brand. And, as I wrote a whole book on the subject of visual hammer. And I think, as well for your brand, going to be really important to think about, finding the right name, and in particular, finding a name that can lend itself to a visual hammer. Think about the brand Red Hat that IBM bought. That name, what do they use for their visual hammer? A red hat. And that's a technology services company. It doesn't really say much about their category, but it was very, very different. And also, most importantly, it lent itself to a visual, and that visual has driven that brand into the mind. Their concept, and just in case you're not familiar with the brand, was open source software. And that's really the open source is what built that brand. Again, pioneering in a new category, leadership in that new category. And that's why IBM paid billions for it. So those were the five positioning principles to get us started on our journey here, our marketing journey, which I'm very excited about. And just to quickly review, is global, not national, and we have no doubt we're about building a global brand for your business.
Yeah.
To be competitor focused, not consumer. Now, for you, you're going to be first in a new category. So you have to really think about the competitors as the other categories out there. What are people doing instead of, using your product? So to thinking about that of how we, can be different and position ourselves. Of course, by now we've got to be narrow, not broad. Incredibly important as you're launching a global brand. But even, if you have opportunities in many different industries for many different people, long term, that's great. But short term, you have to start with one specific, market or customer. Starting with very narrow is important. And we'll talk about that in more detail. And of course, the way to grow a company is to do it with multiple brands, not expanding one brand the way GE did and others, but to have multiple brands, each focused on individual categories. And lastly, it's visual, not verbal. The importance, you want to own a word in the mind, but the way to drive that word in the mind is finding a visual hammer that promotes and connotates an emotional response to make your brand memorable, and to make people really really get excited about it and own that idea in the mind.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Laura. That was a wonderful session. And
Well, good. Yeah. No, I think just to get you kind of a feel for the big concepts out there. We'll take more time to delve into these in more detail. In the coming sessions, and we can even talk specifically. I think it would be helpful too for you, in between when we do these sessions, because I think we should spread them out a little just to kind of give you, you don't want to overwhelm your brain too much. But in between, I think I want you to think about your brand, and put together some notes, and some ideas, and how you've reflected on some of the principles I've shown you, and start trying to apply it to you, and then we can work again. I think in the in the later session, about you showing me some of what you've got in your feelings, and I can give you some feedback and direction to go forward.
yeah, surely that sounds like a really good idea. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so since you already know, I've read the two books written by you and your father, 22 Immutable Laws of Branding, Marketing, and then the Internet Branding.
Ah, yes.
So,
Great.
yeah, it was a wonderful session because this was something that I've read in the book, so it registered very well today. And I'm looking forward to learn new things, especially about the visual hammer. That sounds really interesting to add the emotional element in our brand. That's something I'm looking forward to. And yes, just one thing, if we could, like you said very rightly, space out the session so that I could share my learnings with you, and
Yes.
how I related it to the brand, uh, to Sunroof, and your perspective on that. So
Yes. I think that would be good. So I will actually, I'm going to be in South America all of next week, but I think, depending on your schedule, every 2 weeks, every 2.5 weeks, I think, something like that, I think would be very good. So we
yeah,
can,
2 weeks sounds like a good time gap.
yeah, perfect. And if this, I'll check my schedule. So either, a Monday or Tuesday, something like that would be fine. Or actually any day of the week we can, but this day is totally fine. And yeah, I'll look forward to the next one. So yeah, maybe we will talk about visual hammer next, and then start some assignments for thinking about your brand, or and all the exciting issues and principles to work on.
Yeah, definitely. I love the presentation, but you know what I loved more? Your energy and enthusiasm to work with entrepreneurs. Not just that, but your energy was actually radiating into me. So
Oh, well,
so
thank you.
hyped up
Well,
and so
and yeah,
energetic.
well, and good. And one last thing, I know, I spent I was talking for most of the time. I did want to kind of get out some of these main principles, but as we get into this, we'll definitely have can have more of an interaction. With the these kinds of principle speeches, it kind of works to I have a sort of flow of it.
I understand
But
that, of course. Yeah.
yeah, but when we get to, I think it'll be helpful to the interaction of your brand or concepts. Then we'll get into the more back and forth. So just know that will be coming.
Absolutely. Yes. Lovely.
Okay. Well, good. Well, say hello to your father, and we'll look forward to scheduling and seeing you again in 2 weeks.
For sure. Thank you so much
Okay.
for the session today,
All
Lauren.
right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.